I think a big piece of why people get in the industry is because we like being outside. We like being with our hands in the dirt or running equipment. We like to see what we're doing. And having to think about how we use technology is just part of the game now. Like this is part of the deal. But it's incredibly intimidating if you didn't grow up knowing, like learning about software. Like that, I have an unfair advantage because I spoke technology from a young age because of that background. And so most people who are in the industry didn't get into it to play with software and technology. And it's very frustrating and very overwhelming, and especially with how fast everything is changing. And so knowing how to confidently assess tools, know whether or not it's even the right time for a company to get technology, just because all the industry consultants say you should have tech, you should have tech. But why? For what purpose? Like there has to be some level of reasonableness that says this is the appropriate software for the size company we are. And then how do you evaluate it? How do you implement it? How do you make sure that there's some buy-in? And if you haven't shopped for technology before, you don't necessarily know what to look for. You don't know how software is built. You don't know how, when they say features and functions, what that means to you. You don't even know how to assess this is important or this is a shiny that the tool offers, but it's not actually functionally useful for our day-to-day processes. And so I think that whole bucket of I don't even know what we're talking about. I don't know how to assess tools. I just know I'm supposed to use it is a good starting point, and that's kind of who I want to talk to and help get a common language and feel more confident about what to think about without stressing about it too much. Like also a lot of what we do running businesses is a test. Like we just have to be able to be willing to iterate, and most software allows you to do that. And so I think the goal is to have software and technology be less intimidating for folks who didn't get into the industry to be techie kids.
One of the interesting pieces about the tech side of the landscaping industry that I've noticed is that some companies have invested in a CTO and some have not.
Mhm.
How do you decide, and I don't know if your session will cover this or not, but how do you decide as a landscape business owner when it's time to put that responsibility on somebody else's plate or take it on yourself, even if you've never had that background like you're talking about?
I think an owner, no matter what size company, needs to know enough to not get taken advantage of. So you need to know conceptually, and you also need to know enough to have bought into the tool use, because no tool is going to get adopted unless the people who are leading the company have bought into it in truth, not just lip service. And so I don't necessarily think a good CEO, the set of skills it takes to be a good CEO are not the same skills it takes to be a good CTO. I think the ability to make decisions and make an assessment and, this versus that, and does this align with our values is very much a CEO kind of brain, like the lane for this. But a true CTO really is coming at this with usually software industry experience layered into the operations of a landscape company. And so knowing that that's a very sophisticated place to be coming from. And they often come into the industry having a blast because they're so used to being just around all the nerdy friends, which is nothing bad, but that's a world that they're used to. Coming into the landscape industry can be fun, but most landscapers don't usually go in the reverse. And so I think there's certainly the wiring is overlapped with CEO. So, like, if you're looking for just characteristics, it's close to CEO from a decision making and does this feel right? But as far as the scale, you don't need to be hiring a full-time CTO unless you are integrating multiple platforms, you got multiple branches, you're trying to manage tons and tons of data. I don't know if there is I'm sure there's industry consultants that say when you get to X number of dollars in revenue, I don't think it matters whether or not it's a revenue piece. It's can your company afford to do it? So it's about profitability, not the revenue size, because you can be running a $10 million company and not have enough money for a CTO. That being said, usually if you're that level, you can't not have a CTO because they're going to help cover their expense, the overhead cost. If they can find savings and optimization of systems, they usually can get paid for. It's just like having um, a director of people or HR. I think it's one of the things that will scale up, and you can always get a fractional CTO. And so the reason that I wanted people to know about this is you don't need to be spending tons of money on a fractional CTO or a full-time CTO until you are doing massive amounts of data and operations and logistics and fleets and multiple locations. We're talking, I can't imagine needing to have a full-time CTO unless you are north of five, probably if not north of $10 million a year. Because you can do totally fine making good enough decisions, probably at least up to $5 million a year in revenue without needing a full-time CEO. I wouldn't even do a fractional one until $5 million because it's fine for the most part. Now, that being said, I'm coming at this with a nerdy background, right? Like, not everybody's going to feel as confident in that. And so it doesn't mean that you can't have a consultant come in for a day or two and advise. It doesn't mean you can't phone a friend. It doesn't mean you can't use a peer group advisor. It doesn't mean you can't be scrappy about that, but I don't think there needs to be a requirement or an obligation or more pressure, heaven forbid, more pressure that we need to have another role at our company that we don't understand. And so I think just dipping our toe in the water and feeling more confident in it as a CEO, as a leader of a company, it doesn't even need to be the CEO. It could just be somebody on the leadership team who gets passionate around, I think this could help us run our business better or take care of our clients better or take care of our team better. There's some framework that all of that is the same pattern. I wouldn't dump a bunch of money in it unless you absolutely have to. It's one of these things that doesn't have to be as intimidating if you get some of the basics down. It's all the same pattern of decision making. Is this right for my people? That
Yeah.
and knowing how to navigate that is really the only nuance.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And speaking on is this right for my people, how do you determine whether you're looking for a fractional CTO, a full-time CTO, or just pinpointing the person already on your team who might be somebody who can champion new technology? What sorts of questions do you need to ask yourself as a leader or ask those candidates to try to determine who is the right fit to kind of champion that tech?
Um, my pithy answer is the person who doesn't like technology. And the reason being is they're the ones who are going to be the hardest to convince. So if they own it, you already have the best advocate you can in your whole company. If the naysayer says okay, because you don't have to work as hard to convince the one who's the nerdy like software geek. You don't have to convince them. Their problem is they're going to want to do stuff 3 to 5 years ahead of the rest of the company. And so if you really want adoption and you want somebody who's going to be motivated to help you move, you have to find the what's in it for me with the person who is the least excited about technology. I mean, that's a pithy answer, but the similar approach that says somebody who's not in love with technology is going to help you be sort of an internal apostle. That being said, if they're not comfortable with technology, they may not be the right person to help assess tools or help implement them solo. But if they're partnered with somebody else who's got like an operations brain, then I think you're in good shape. Um, I'm not sure if that even answered your question, but
It
that was
does. No, it
that was my
does.
gut instinct.
It does. No, that makes a lot of sense. I guess the last thing that I wanted to ask about is how, especially if you're thinking like a CTO, right? How are you on the lookout for new technology? What sorts of things are you constantly evaluating? Like, where do you even go to be like, all right, this is software that we might want to consider adopting, or oh, this autonomous machine is something that we might want to consider. Like, how do you keep up to date?
You don't. You don't in all reality. And so we have to stop feeling guilty that we cannot keep up possibly with all the new things and all of the places in the industry. It's not possible, and it's an unachievable goal. So if you start from you can't keep up with it, then everything gets easier. Um, I mean, minimally, we're keeping an eye out for other people near us who are running businesses in general, not just landscape businesses, just other business owners. So I have, a circle of people that are part of my local chamber or local volunteer groups. Just talking to other humans about technology that they're using is a way to absorb some of that. Keeping up on industry periodicals and articles and Conferences, that is another way, being part of a peer group or just talking to other business owners specifically around technology needs and what they're doing. Um, you can also just get involved with like a non-industry specific tech, like Reddit channel or sorry, thread, or a Facebook group that's around software for the industry or industry like the Forbes magazines, like just keeping an ear out to anything that feels like it might be relevant. Also, I have ADHD, so I'm pattern recognizing across multiple industries when I'm looking at technology. That's not bad for a CTO to have that. It is not expected for most business owners to be able to pattern recognize from other industries and be like, oh, well, this software does this basic thing. And if you used it in this service, why couldn't you use it in this service industry? So that's that's a superpower that most CTOs have, not normal for most landscape contractors. So if you were trying to keep that smaller and more manageable, checking with peers, industry conferences, industry periodicals. That's plenty of information to get somebody rolling. And then Google, like you can just Google most things now, but I would rather talk to a human who's done it, lived it, tried to use the software before, and said, here's the reality. There's no ever perfect software, but here's what we found, here's what worked, here's what didn't. Buyer beware. This is going to be what happens when you try to do this thing. Okay, fine. So you can keep it simpler, but because my brain is looking for patterns outside of the industry, I'm also looking in non-traditional places. But it can get overwhelming to try to keep up with all of it all at once. It's just not reasonable to hope that for anybody.
Leigh, I know I said I had one last question for you on the
It's
last
fine.
question, but I do have one more because you brought up industry conferences, and I think I'd be remiss to not ask if you've been to the technology conference before, and whether you have or not, what are you looking forward to at our show this July?
Ironically, I have not attended yet. I am one of the on the bell curve of like early adopters. I'm usually second, so I didn't make it to the first ones. But a number of my industry friends that have been, who are in the techie world, have been there, and I always felt like I was missing out. And if I wanted to be in the room with the people who are moving and shaking and being big thinkers and strategically kind of jumping ahead of the industry, because we've got like 40 years of catching up to do, that I wanted to be around the people who were having those conversations. So I have wanted to go, and then was very focused operationally on my business for a couple years and couldn't swing it. Then I got into a peer group and didn't have as much, I couldn't split between industry conferences and the peer group. And so now I'm on the edge of being able to have some capacity again to get to be nerdy. And so that's the timing just had to work out for me to go. So the thing I'm looking forward to is getting to be in the room with other people who are forward thinking, even if they don't have the answers, but are trying to help level up the industry. And that could be tech, that could just be in thinking.